Hey everybody, it's a really exciting time right now for Gwent. Everyone is just kind of dying for new content, and today we got not just a trailer, not just a discussion of the new cards, but some actual peeks at what the new cards are, and one of them being playable. I just wanted to go through them real quick so you guys can catch up. Here it is in expanded and exploded format. So we're going to cruise through what those cards are, and I'm going to give you a little bit of my initial impressions as to what they are. So right down here is our best boy Alzer. I wish I can get a better shot of this for you, but what we can do is I can just get rid of my camera so you guys don't have to look at my ugly face while we do this. And there we go. So our first guy is Alzer, which is essentially the theme of not just the journey, but it's a way of the Witcher is essentially our moving forward with what the expansion is called, and Alzer being a very central figure in the next expansion, in the next journey, and here he is in card form. So what do we got for Alzer? Well, he's a 6 for 11 provision, and he is a human, a mage, and what his deal is whenever you play a spell, spawn a random unit with the same provision cost on this row with a counter of 3. So you get 3 shots with him, and now it's a spell, not special, so you got to make sure that you're actually hitting a spell and not just any random special card. Again, depends on how many card games you play, but spells and specials and such like that, just make sure that you get the right stuff going, and because it's only going to take one silly mistake before you realize what's happening. Now, what are my initial impressions of this? This card, as cool as it is, in my opinion, kind of one of those cards that kind of gives me a little bit of pause in terms of what this might do for Gwent moving forward, because we have seen Gwent being a card game that's now 4 years deep plus, that there have been mistakes made in the past with certain cards, certain trajectories of where the game's going, and one of those was a debacle of RNG Fiesta nonsense that really set the game back in terms of its identity, but also in terms of, not just its uniqueness, but also what the card game is supposed to be in terms of not just, like a virtual chess match and this and that, but there's got to be a little bit of variety and flavor to it. But something like this reminds me of what Yogg-Saron was with Hearthstone back in the day. Now, I don't want to compare the two games because they're completely different games, completely different developers and such, but I've put enough time into both games in my entire life that I can see a little bit of similarity. Now, Yogg-Saron was supposed to be a card that had zero, competitive aspirations. It was a giant RNG fiesta that was not supposed to be competitive or viable on the competitive scene, when in reality that's exactly what it became, because people soon figured out that if you're going to be casting random spells off of Yogg-Saron, the majority of them are going to be positive in your favor. So if you cast 15 or 20 spells, you can probably, ascertain that probably 2/3 of them are going to be helpful, whereas maybe 1/3 of them are going to set you back. And the grand scheme of things, the net worth of that is that you're going to come out on top. So people played it because it was a catch-all, fix-all for when the board state was a little bit ridiculous. Now, is Alzer a card like that? Not really, because Gwent has the benefit, some would say, or the limitation, others would argue, that you can only play one card per turn. So it's not like you can just play Alzer and then pop it off with a few other spells all at once. Now, we don't know what the other cards are that are going to be revealed. Maybe there's something that can pair up with that, a card that can have an order effect to play a spell from your deck. But regardless, the thing about this card is that I feel like people are soon going to figure out where those high value or safer benefits are going to be, in terms of what provision cost you're going to be playing with Alzer. And that kind of brings me a little bit of concern, because you don't want a card like Alzer to be an RNG fiesta where it gets out of control, wherein there's always going to be some crazy high-end value off of this card. This card seems like, to me, to be something along the lines of one of those Feast or Famine, Ride or Die cards where it's either answered or it really runs the table and becomes a little bit spooky. Now, we've seen those types of cards before. It just kind of adds to the whole, factor of do you run Heatwave? Do you not run Heatwave? Do you have to have answers to other people's cards? It's like when your opponent plays a scenario, does it immediately get heat waved? Something like Alzur is similar to that. Your opponent plays a defender, you get rid of the defender. Then he plays Alzur, and then do you have an answer for Alzur? So this is going to be another situation where you either have to massively outvalue your opponent to counter Alzur, or are you going to have to play two types of removal to get the protection away from Alzur and then get Alzur off the board in its stead? This is not a row-locked unit, so you're going to have two hard removal cards to get rid of it. Now, with a 6-point body, that's difficult to do. You have something like Parasite, you have something like Decoction, but most decks are not going to be able to handle it, and it's going to be tough to deal with. A card like Madame Louisa with the order ability attached to it was completely wiped off of the meta once it had a one-turn sort of waiting time. Now, this does too to that effect because you can't really play a spell right on top of it, but is this card going to run the table? Is this card going to be something that is problematic? I suspect that this Alzur card is going to be, I don't want to say interesting, but I feel like if this was a 5-point card, it might be too weak, given the fact that there's so many 5-point removal spells out there, be it Boiling Oil, Nature's Rebuke, Alzur's Thunder, ironically, or is it just that one extra point of 6 body too much out of its range? We'll see how this goes, but very, very unique card that you can craft right now. Now, moving down, no monster reveals yet. Absolutely none. There are no Witchers. That has already been discussed. However, there is some good spice coming from this faction. So this is my favorite faction, and I suspect that there's going to be some fireworks coming out of here, something to counteract what the other factions are bringing to the table, which is some Witcher flavor. Now, moving down to Nilfgaard, where a lot of people have a lot of angst for the fact that Nilfgaard is kind of in the dumpsters right now. Not that it's laughably bad, but it's the worst out of all the factions. So everyone's saying buff it, buff it, buff it, after they were saying nerf it, nerf it, nerf it. Now, that is basically the war cry of Reddit and the emotional internet society. However, you can't have everything on top of the meta all at once, but that's a whole other discussion for a whole other video that I'm probably never going to make. So let's talk about the reveals and the Viper Witcher. The Viper Witcher is shades of old, if you do not recall. Old school 3-row Gwent. The Viper Witcher was an alchemy assisted card back in old school beta Gwent. So this one says, deploy, put Bleeding 2 on an enemy unit. Now, Bleeding 2 is interesting. Putting bleeding on something, not giving bleeding something, is one of those, you can make the memes now, oh my god, completely unplayable, the wording is different. Regardless, give bleeding to an enemy unit. Now, Adrenaline 6, spawn a copy of that unit the top of your opponent's deck. Interesting little interaction here, given the fact that you're adding cards to your opponent's deck, and if it's a bad card, if it's a lowly bronze card, a token, something garbage, it should be interesting. Adrenaline being a new keyword, meaning that Adrenaline X, where X is the number of cards or less. So Adrenaline 6 kicks in when you have 6 or less cards in your hand. Viper Witcher, very, very cool. And why is this a cool card? Because it factors into Colgrim, which is a Witcher right over here. What does Colgrim do? Adrenaline 2, again, factoring in when you have 2 or less cards. The end of your turn. Boost self by the difference between number of cards in each player's deck. So if your deck has 5 cards left and your opponent has 10, you'll get a buff of that difference being 5 every turn. So buff 5 at the end of your turn, buff 5 at the end of the next turn, and buff 5 at the end of the last turn, given the fact that you're not going to be drawing cards. Now, ways around this is you play this. Isbell, let's say, where you add the extra card to your hand. You play it with Mata, add an extra card to your hand, so that Adrenaline 2 gets prolonged a little bit longer, where Colgrim is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and probably just die to a Heat Wave or Curse of Corruption or God knows what, but still, it's still out there. Now, there's 2 ways that you can kind of go along with this. The first would be maybe just running a hyper thin list, where you are thinning your deck to crazy amounts in order to, frankly, just have a lot less cards than your opponent would, getting in all the thinning cards as possible, drawing as many cards as possible so that you have a much lower card count, and that discrepancy between your deck and theirs is big. Colgrim gets a bunch of ticks off of it, and suddenly it's off to the races. The other would be to mill your opponent, and get them to have almost no cards and see what happens, and then have Colgrim as a fantastic finisher. I would suspect that that is a fantastic way to play the game and 2-0 your opponent. So a little bit of difference here. Of course, if you're milling your opponent, this is going to be a little bit more difficult, but the Viper Witcher, along with a hyper-thin strategy, means that you're adding cards to your opponent's deck that they're going to have to draw, and suddenly it's looking good. There is that 4 provision bronze card that sits on the melee row that when the round is over, that card is shuffled into their deck. There are plenty of ways for Nilfgaard to add cards to your opponent's deck now. So Colgrim, Viper Witcher, lots of good, delicious flavor. All right, on to Northern Realms, the faction that I admittedly am terrible at. And here we go. So here's Cohen, I'm going to say. And it is a 3 strength 7 provision card with Zeal, the order being boost all units with power equal to Cohen's power by the amount Cohen is boosted. So if Cohen is boosted to 5, all your 5 strength units will then be boosted to by what he is boosted, which is 2, so they're boosted to 7. There's a lot of tricky math, but with something like Shield Wall, or where you're going to have a lot of boosting engines going on, if you can kind of line things up and do the math, you should have a good time with Cohen, as well as maybe playing with Uprising, getting a whole bunch of stuff on the board, and making it work that way. It's going to take some finesse to get Cohen to be, really reliable, but I suspect that there's going to be a lot of players out there that are going to find the most efficient way to make this work in quite the effective and meta-defining way for this card to work. Now, is this a good card particularly? I ain't gonna touch it, that's for sure. It's Northern Realms, and I tend to not like theory crafting with Northern Realms, so I will leave this to the bigger brains than my own to go ahead and figure out what's going on with Cohen. There he is. Cohen is another Witcher. Now, here's the card I'm most excited about, because this is going to revive what I think is a archetype that could be fun to play. Now, we all remember the old Harmony and the Mystic Echo Harmony that was pretty much a staple within the meta some like 6 months ago before the leaders were changed. Everyone was waiting for new Harmony cards to come out, or new, rather, Harmony triggering cards, new types of units and their subclasses, be it Beast, Elf, Dwarf. Eventually you got a Machine, which was nice to trigger all that, a Gnome to go ahead and add to that as well. And here now is another little change, which is Brehen being a Witcher. So there you go, another big proc on all of your Harmony triggers, because he is a Witcher and he's green. Wonderful, amazing Scoia'tael Witcher. So if you're doing the math there, you probably got a whole bunch of different types. You got a dragon, you got a Witcher now, and life is just a beautiful circus of amazingness. And what is this going to be? Well, I suspect that this with movement could be pretty damn nasty, because the deploy effect for Brehen is destroy the rightmost unit on an enemy row with at least 5 units. Adrenaline 3 being if you have 3 or less cards, destroy the rightmost unit on an enemy row with at least 3 units instead. Now, typically something like this, I mean, you do want to pick and choose what you're going to kill, but I feel like with all your harmonies set up, with all those different units on the board, you are probably going to be playing this fairly late in the game, letting your opponent build up their cards so that you can destroy it with Brehen later. So not only are you getting a finisher that can potentially kill stuff, trigger a whole lot of Harmony cards, but at the same time, you're getting the option to go ahead and kill something that they have that is pretty top-notch. Now, it's worth noting that making a card the rightmost card on a row is not going to be that tough if you're using the correct leader ability, which is the movement leader ability with Scoia'tael. So you can go ahead, move something with your leader ability, and then use Brehen to kill it, because it will then be the rightmost unit. Because when you move a unit, it goes to the rightmost slot. So if you do this correctly, Brehen could be a solid little answer to a tall unit if necessary, and you should be able to sort of finesse your way around a unit's or a player's defender and such. And as far as I know, this targets a row. It does not target a unit. So you don't need to worry about defenders. You just move the card to the row you want it to be, and then go ahead and snipe it with Brehen, getting all those beautiful, delicious Harmony triggers all at the same time. This is going to be my first Scoia'tael Theorycraft with the new set. I'm really dying to see what other cards we get out of this. Maybe new elves, new beasts, new God knows what, but this feels like a fun way to revive the Harmony archetype. All right, off to Skillage, aka Skellige. Another bronze card showing up over here, but let's go straight to the Witcher Gerd. They have the best names, don't they? They just sound like they are fantastic. Skellige is like the... I'm not going to say it. All right. Well, either way, he's a Witcher. Deploys to spawn a deafening siren on the opposite row and damage all units on that row by 1. Adrenaline 4, spawn a deafening siren on the opposite row and damage it by 1 instead. So, you're damaging all units, you're damaging 1 unit. Interesting. It's all about how you want to use this. Do you want to use it early? There's going to be a penalty for playing it late because you're not damaging all units, you're only damaging it. So it's a Witcher as well. Pretty decent body, 8 for 7, so you're going to be getting some good value off this card. It's just going to be some good swarm punish early. It's like almost like a Hemdall to a degree, dealing 1 damage to everything that's on that row at a discount at 7 provisions. So there you have it. And here is the Bear Witcher Mentor, and it's a bronze Witcher card. Deploy boost self by 1 for every damaged ally unit. Self-wounding anyone, and Adrenaline 3, boost self by 1 for every damaged unit. This could be a great late game push card. Again, Adrenaline 3, meaning if you have 3 or less cards in your hand, may you still have enough time to play your late game finishers. But if you're going to be doing a crap load of damage to your opponent and spreading it out, having everybody in the red, this is going to be a big bronze card to just drop down there for 5 provisions. I suspect this is going to get some love. I think that the self-wounding / just everybody in the red kind of archetype is going to be revived and maybe get a bigger push with this card. I like it. And of course, Skellige is the faction I hate the most, but I do think that this card is going to be quite powerful. Moving on to Syndicate, and here's another bronze card, Salamandra Abomination. Cool art over there. I can't wait to see how these turn out in the premium sense, but it's a beast, Salamandra tribe, and tribute 1, so you pay that 1 tribute. Poison itself. Whenever this unit is poisoned, boost self by 2. Adrenaline 4. The end of your turn, purify itself. So you can go with that self-poisoning strategy, which was kind of, tickled upon in previous expansions, which never really took off. But the Salamandra Abomination comes in, pay the 1 tribute, poison itself, and if it's 4 cards or less left in your hand, well, then it'll purify itself at the end of the turn as well. So you can continue doing it. Now, if self-poison becomes an archetype, well, then maybe people will be packing in 1 random poison card in their deck or something like that. I highly doubt it, but I don't foresee a problem if something like Squayatel just drops in one poison card in there that has other, a harmony tag on it, or the armor just kind of having it there in case. But the Salamandra Abomination, the art intrigues me more, frankly, than the self-poisoning archetype, but again, bigger brains than mine will figure that out as we see Roland Bleinheim. What a name. A human, a salamander. Whenever a unit is poisoned, gain 2 coins. Adrenaline 5, whenever an allied unit is poisoned, gain 2 coins instead. So you've got options here. Again, don't just poison them, poison yourself. It's a 7 for 7 body to provision trade, which is a little bit okay, but it's another way to gain coins and generate a little bit of money in your pocket. I think that there are better ways to do that, but at a 7 body, you can probably feel safe leaving this on the table as it's underneath that Geralt, vanilla Geralt umbrella, and it's big enough to sort of dodge those 1 card removal spells. So here we are. This is the Way of the Witcher, the first few cards coming through. Again, my favorite one so far is Bran, because it's going to add some spice to Harmony and give movement a nice kick in the butt. And then we also have something like Colgrim and the Viper Witcher, which I think there is some significant potential with that hyper thin slash adding cards to your opponent's list. This is something that I want to touch upon when we finally get the cards on December 8th. Well, friends, I really do. I'm so excited for these new cards. It's fantastic that we're getting some new stuff. Again, if it was up to me, we'd get new cards 3-4 times a year, but the quality of the cards look fantastic, and the artwork again is great. Thanks again to CDPR for all that jazz. And if you want to check me out playing these cards when they come out, as well as all the stuff that currently exists, you can check me out twitch.tv/watchflake. If not, well, it's up to you. Love you all. Be kind to one another. Thanks for watching, and leave your comments. What are you most excited about? What do you want to see? There's a lot of hype surrounding the mystery of what Monsters is. Is there something you think that might happen? Some kind of crazy new mechanic or crazy new card? I suspect that Monsters is going to get one hell of a bomb. So we'll see how it goes. But love you all. Adios.